evening and welcome to the August 10th, 2017 School Committee meeting. We're happy to have you join us. This evening's meeting is being recorded by Easthampton Media. Easthampton Media channels 191, 192, and 193 is looking for volunteers. If anyone is interested in helping to tape city government meetings, please contact Kathy Lynch at 413-203-1360. Superintendent Ballensby, do you have some announcements
I
for
do.
us?
The next regular school committee meetings are Thursday, August 24th, Tuesday, September 12th, and Tuesday, September 26th. The first day of school for students is Tuesday, September 5th, 2017. Only students in grades 10, 11, and 12 have a delayed opening. Kindergarten screening is September 5th and 6th. Kindergarten visiting day is September 7th, and kindergarten students' first day is September 8th. For community members or others who do not have children in our schools and want to receive the superintendent updates, which will begin when school begins in September, please visit our website at www.epsd.us and click to subscribe under latest superintendent update.
Thank you very much. So at this time, I'd also like to announce a fairly new member of our committee here. Carly Doney is here today to be our student representative.
Awesome.
And she's on the school student council at the high school. And so she will be occasionally sitting in on our committee when Karina, what's her last name? Patterson, I'm sorry, cannot be with us. So we'd just like to welcome Carly this evening, and we're happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Nice to have you. Thanks.
Okay, I also would like to take this opportunity to provide a brief update on the work underway to improve climate and culture in our school communities, particularly to foster candid conversations about identity and diversity. This district has launched partnerships with two organizations to support our work in eradicating bias from our schools, the Anti-Defamation League and the Collaborative for Educational Services. Later this month, the ADL will conduct trainings for staff at the middle and high schools to set the stage for continued work with students, families, and staff throughout the school year. We will provide additional details about the partnerships in the coming weeks. Two investigative reports, one from the superintendent and one from the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, and a report related to the culture and climate at the high school from the Collaborative are also forthcoming. Although we had originally intended to present these on August 10th, this meeting, we have scheduled an additional school committee meeting on August 24th, and we'll present them to the community at that time. So we'd like to thank everyone for your continued interest and involvement in this important work, and we will be speaking more on all of this at our meeting on August 24th. Next on the agenda is correspondence.
We have none.
And gifts?
We have none.
Okay. So it moves us to the public speak portion of our meeting. So we would like to welcome anyone who might like to speak to the committee to come forward and do so at this time. If anyone would be interested. We ask that you limit your comments to 2 minutes and tell us who you are. And it doesn't look as though anyone is here to do that. So we will be moving on to our subcommittee reports. I know the Finance Subcommittee is not met. Is that correct, Cynthia?
Correct.
Okay, and the Policy Review Subcommittee.
We have minutes to submit for the meeting on Thursday, July 13th, 2017. So I'm having a hard time with the English language tonight. What's the word?
We don't have to approve them.
Oh, we don't have to approve them. Sorry.
You could just, alert everyone to those.
Right,
minutes.
and they're posted as part of the packet. They're available. We reviewed our resolution for the rights of undocumented students. We looked at the revision. We reviewed the policy on unpaid school lunch accounts, and we had a productive discussion with and about the memorandum of understanding for the school resource officer. So all of those are in process. And it was a long meeting too.
Mm-hmm.
So it was good.
It was good.
It was great.
Any other comments or anything to add to that, Sarah?
Are we going over the what we came up with for undocumented students now? Is that being?
Yeah, I have
item D.
plans to.
Okay.
Yeah. I have plans to have us vote on that resolution.
Okay. Yeah, it was a great discussion of really wide diversity of topics, and I felt like we got a lot of good work done, so I'm excited about the direction we're going in.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the Collaborative for Educational Services update.
Collaborative has not met, will be meeting September 27th.
Okay. And Marissa, who traditionally handles our education policy update, is not with us this evening, so we will move on.
Actually, can I pause this for a second?
Okay.
I want to point out in a reoccurring theme that I've addressed before, the discussion about the role of and the theory behind charter and choice in education. And the way I bring this up is the other day I was listening to a news program in another New England state that was talking about what's happening as their overall student population declines. Now, that's not the case here in Easthampton, but in New England, we are becoming an older population, and the concern that I have that connects charter and choice with that demographic reality, that's just a social force that moves through, is that when you constantly have an education about the money should follow the child, which is part of the rationale for the funding in those, you encourage people to think in terms of themselves as individual units and not in terms of the community impact. And if you encourage that kind of thinking at the same time that the percentage of households that have school-age children is going down, you're creating a recipe for undermining support for public education. And I know that it's just, for me, it's one more level, and I realize it's a couple of degrees removed from what happens immediately in school, and it's sort of an egghead idea in a way, and I'm happy to wear the egghead cap tonight in saying it. But the theory comes around to being reality. If you want to build support and investment in public education, one of the ways you don't do it is by encouraging households to think exclusively in terms of what's best for their child, even if it comes at the expense of the community as a whole. And that's what the funding formula for charter and choice does, as it's conceived and executed in the state of Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth. It's contrary to the very term Commonwealth, the way we do it. And so I would suggest that we continue to be mindful of that. You can't, out of one side of your mouth, say that you want to see public education improve, and out of the checkbook side of your mouth fund the disillusion of connections to public institutions like that. And so I continue to believe that as appealing as you can make some of the arguments about charter and choice and why they play a vital role in some parts of the Commonwealth, I think that it is yet another way that we sort of turn society into not a community, but a collection of individual households that should only think and should only operate on a cost-benefit analysis for their own good. And so, as I say, this is in another state that's facing far dire circumstances. They've seen a 10% reduction. And in some communities, the percentage of households that have school-age children is below, 20%. And whenever you try to have a tax question that's related to education, or a capital expense that's related to education, when you try to build a new building to serve students, you're encouraging all those other households to think, well, okay, so I should think of this as just in terms of how it affects me, not in terms of how it affects the greater good. And if it's going to raise my taxes and I don't have any kids, then no. And anybody who wants to make the counter argument, I would invite them here and we could have a thoughtful discussion about it, because it was a pretty compelling story that if we want to see the end of public education, continue to get people to think only in terms of how it affects them, and we will speed its demise. So thanks.
Okay. Moving on, the policy subcommittee, as Sarah and Peter mentioned, and is reflected in the minutes, has put together a resolution, and it's regarding the rights of undocumented students and protocols for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement access to schools and student information. And at this time, what I'd like to do is read this aloud, and then we'll be looking for a vote of support for this from the committee. or if there's any discussion before we do that. Okay. The preamble is as follows. The Easthampton School Committee is committed to the success of every student in each of our schools, irrespective of race, color, sex, gender identity, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, or immigration status. The mission of Easthampton Public Schools includes, quote, providing an excellent education for all students, unquote, and providing the resources required so that all members of the school community, students, parents, teachers, administrators, and staff, can work together to produce a learning environment that meets each student's needs. The committee believes that to produce this learning environment, it is essential that our schools are safe and inviting for all students and their families. In accordance with our non-discrimination policy, the district does not tolerate any form of discrimination, harassment, or bullying. This safe, inviting, and discrimination-free environment would be threatened by the presence of Immigration and Customs Enforcement employees who come on district property for the purposes of removing students or their family members or obtaining information about students and their families. This position is consistent with state and federal law and with the following advisory from the Massachusetts Attorney General. Quote, enrollment practices that single out students based on their actual or perceived citizenship or immigration status or that of their parents or guardians violate state and federal law. Equal access to public education means not only the right to enroll in school, but also the right to an education free from unlawful discrimination and harassment, unquote. Accordingly, we adopt the following resolution. Number 1, in keeping with current policy and practice, Easthampton Public Schools staff shall not ask about any student's immigration status or that of any student's family members, and pursuant to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, shall not disclose without parental consent the immigration status of any student. Number 2, in keeping with current policy and practice, Easthampton Public Schools staff will not refer students or families to Immigration and Customs Enforcement if students inadvertently or intentionally disclose their immigration status. Pursuant to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, Easthampton Public Schools staff shall not disclose protected information about any student or any student's family members to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Number 3, existing district practice requires all visitors to state the reason for their visit and be cleared for entry into a space with students. Consistent with that practice, any ICE employee, that is, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, intending to enter any Easthampton Public Schools property must first notify the superintendent and the district's general counsel of its intention in person with adequate notice and copies of a warrant signed by a judge or a magistrate so the superintendent and general counsel can take steps to provide for the emotional and physical safety of its students and staff. Number 4, the superintendent and/or general counsel shall ask for the ICE agent's credentials, ask the agent the reason for the requesting access, and ask to see a warrant. If a warrant is not provided, the superintendent, general counsel, shall deny access of ICE into the school setting. Number 5, the school committee and superintendent shall provide written guidelines in service of this resolution to be kept in each of the school district's buildings. Number 6, the superintendent shall provide training for teachers, staff, and administration on how to respond to ICE personnel who are requesting information about students and families or are attempting to enter our district property in accordance with the guidelines. And finally, the policy subcommittee of the Easthampton School Committee is charged with reviewing existing district policies regarding immigration and making any recommendations for policies or changes to existing policies as are warranted. Is there any comments or further discussion from committee members at this time?
Well, I move that we approve and adopt the policy.
I second.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve and adopt it. It's been seconded. All those in favor? The motion passes. Thank you very much. Appreciate all the subcommittee's work on that effort.
And I want to thank again, I believe it was September or October, Casey, for proposing this initially. As it
January.
January.
I had thought of it though, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, when
Well, I
yeah.
think that it's noteworthy that it was a proactive suggestion.
I have a quick question just for Nancy. If you look at number 5, it says the school committee and superintendent shall provide written guidelines that will be kept in each of the school buildings. Once that's given to each of the school buildings, will then it be given to all the teachers so
Yes.
that they have that in their room?
And that
Okay.
training piece will be
Okay.
part of this as well.
Okay.
Do you guys have an idea of when the training will?
We have not set a time for it yet. We may be able to accomplish that during the first 3 days in August. That would be
Excellent.
the preference if we can do it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you guys for working.
Thanks for
really
bringing
hard
it
on
up.
this.
Yeah, thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
to keep those students safe and everything. I think it's, I know I can't vote, but I think I'm glad that you passed it.
Thanks for that input.
We always like appreciate your
Yeah.
input too, even though you're not a voting
Yeah.
member. Like it's really, really important and it really helps us. So thank you for doing that.
and we typically have on the agenda a student activities update where we turn to our student representative and ask them to fill us in on what is taking place at the high school. And we don't have that because it's the summer, so we haven't had that on the agenda in the last couple meetings. But I wanted to take this opportunity to ask Carly if you have anything that you do want to share with us by way of information about students at the high school or anything happening at the high school. Or
I mean, I know that the senior class is organizing a fundraiser. I think it's supposed to be at Saranac Buick, and I think it's supposed to be September 2nd. So that's all that I know about what's happening right now. So.
will that be a car wash?
Yeah.
Okay. So everyone get your cars nice and dirty for September 2nd.
Problem with that.
Put it on your calendar.
And
Sounds good.
And you can continue after this, but I just want to thank Saranac for making a highly visible, well-traveled space. You can hold a fundraiser off in some locations, and people will forget and not take advantage of it. And I think it's terrific for that business to make that sort of contribution in kind. It's a very high-profile place, and I trust that means you'll get a lot of work.
I also think I think they supply the supplies, don't they? I think they do.
Yeah, I think they might actually.
That's
Very
great.
nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So we should, that's an example, right, where we would thank them in the gifts.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Formally at an upcoming meeting. Okay,
Should
terrific.
make a note of that. Thank you, Carly. Anything else?
Not that I know of.
Okay. I'm sure there'll be lots more once school starts. Okay, at this time we'll turn to Superintendent Follansby for an update on her matters.
Thank you. So I have asked our Director of Curriculum, Julianne Levin, to come this evening to share some information with you. She has been doing some data collection. We talked about that in our work session previous to this. And she has some kind of interesting data that she brought to me and I thought you would enjoy. Maybe we need to turn off a couple of lights down there just so she can put it on the screen. And then she's also going to share with you the plans for professional development for the first 3 days in August for our faculty and staff. Yeah, it's always a...
This is like every single time.
That looks good. And I think that might do.
We should like mark them.
Those are the ones you want to
soon
post.
as
Yeah, I think you did. I think that's okay.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay, now Stephanie and I are there.
Let's
That's
That's okay. It's peaceful.
this is gonna take a second. How are all of you? It's summer. Isn't it pretty?
It's
There,
not.
coming up.
It's not much summer. I mean, we're almost done. So.
Don't tell the teachers that. I think they are very happily enjoying their summers still.
There's time.
So I'll preface this while this starts up, that one of the pieces of work that I do for the district is to write the Title I, the federal title grants. I work on Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV. There are titles all the way up through, forever, but those are the ones that I cover. And July is this magical month where you get your allocations for your federal grants, and then you have to write the applications, and in it you have to look at a lot of data to figure out how you're going to allocate the funds from those federal grants. And as a district, we've done a really great job of making sure that those grants have been used for mostly early intervention strategies, so both in literacy and math, the use of reading recovery, the use of math tutoring for students who are at those very early grades, where if we catch them then and we can provide the correct interventions, then they're up to grade level, they can be with their peers and be successful members of the general education classroom. So that's what we want. We want to be providing those interventions so that children aren't being siphoned off into special education in great numbers. We want to provide those services for the children who are really in need for that, not students who simply are coming from backgrounds where they've been deprived in some way that doesn't prepare them adequately for that early literacy and early math skills. So one of the indicators in the Title I data is our poverty numbers. And there's been over the last few years, there's been some changes in how we look at those poverty numbers. We used to look at free and reduced lunch, so you may remember that as an indicator. We no longer use free and reduced lunch for a number of reasons. It's not an accurate look at who's actually living in poverty, for one. But there were also some other concerns as well, like if you're just looking at the children in your schools and you're not looking at, it's actually exactly what Peter was just saying. If you're looking at the individual children who are applying for free and reduced lunch and you're not looking at the full community and what poverty looks like for the whole, then you're missing something about how your community can provide a rich education for those students. So now the district poverty number is called economic disadvantagement, and it includes, the formula for it includes both our census data for all of Easthampton and also our children 5 to 17 who are living in poverty. So the formula is both of those numbers combined. When that change was made, the state redid the formula so that you could have comparative data, and you didn't have to make the change between free and reduced and economically disadvantaged. So this graph that I know you can't see very well here, but I'm hoping is in your packet.
Too.
Yes, excellent. What this is showing is that since 2012, we've had a very steady rise in our ooh, hi, come back. We've had a very steady rise in our levels of economically disadvantaged students and our greater Easthampton population. Significantly in the last year, we saw a jump of 8.5% poverty.
Wow.
Which is significant, and we've talked a lot on our leadership team about where that's coming from, why that's true. There are, as I'm sure you all know, there are property developments in Easthampton that particularly cater to low-income households that have opened in the past few years, and so we're seeing more of those children come into our schools, and we're also seeing those numbers influence the greater poverty number of Easthampton, our census data. So that's some news. You may be interested to know that does not mean we get more money in federal grants. Unfortunately, the federal grants have been really severely cut, specifically this year, but it's been a trend over the past 10 years to cut that title funding. I won't go into political reasons of why that's true, but you can find them all over the internet if you'd like. There are very specific reasons why the federal grants have been cut so deeply, and especially in this last year. So even though we have this jump in our poverty numbers, we actually this year had a pretty significant decrease in our allocation funding for those title grants. Despite all of that, what I found so interesting and what I brought to Nancy was it doesn't matter because we have great teaching in this district. So the other thing you're going to see on this graph is that our district CPI, which is our Composite Performance Index, which is an MCAS indicator, has steadily increased along with our increase of poverty. So this is happening in our schools, and our teachers and our administrators, our paraeducators, we are all rising to the challenge, and we are meeting these kids where they are, and we are saying, yes, we are going to provide this education regardless of your background. And so I think that that's really nice news to share. And maybe even a little surprising, because it seems like with this greater need, we would maybe even see just a dip, and we're really not seeing the dip. We're seeing a steady improvement over time, which I love. That said, the teachers are feeling the need, the pressure of the need, and in doing needs assessments across the district last year, one thing that kept coming up was the need for trauma and poverty-informed teaching strategies. So I'm going to pause here for a second if anyone has any questions on this data before I move on to the second piece that I'm going to talk about, which is the amazing training that I just recently did.
So is the...
Yes.
Sorry.
No, I was scratching my head.
Oh, sorry. Is an example of the challenge that we're worried about getting to a tipping point on, where the CPI would start to go in the other direction, that if our goal is to maximize inclusion,
Yes.
it means that a teacher in a class that you might, if you're standing outside in the hall looking through the door where you can't hear, but just see that in that classroom, that we don't have the tracked classroom.
Correct.
Right? We have the inclusion classroom. So a teacher of 24 U.S. history students is going to have the range of students from those who are on quite significant IEPs all the way potentially up to students who are not in the AP class only by choice.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. AP specifically has different specifications,
Right.
but yes, that's largely true.
And our AP is open enrollment, so that would simply be a choice of the student and their family as to
That's
whether or not
correct.
to be there. But in a regular class to fulfill a regular requirement, the challenge that is being aggravated by this trend is that we don't have the ability to segregate students, or we choose not to segregate students out based on something that intuitively you might think would make it easier
Right.
to do the teaching.
So a good example of this, I think, is actually in early literacy. So I can share with you lots of research, but it's pretty well known that language-rich environments are really important for children's early development. And there are numbers out there, but somewhere around 5 million words, right? So you need to have access and exposure to words growing up. And so if you're living in a household where your parents are working a majority of the time and aren't home as often, or you have babysitters that are younger and don't quite have sophisticated language skills, then you may be a student who doesn't reach that magic number of how many words you have, right? But that doesn't constitute a disability for that student. That simply means that that student needs a different way into accessing than those words. We need to look very specifically at how we're providing interventions for students who don't have disabilities, but who are coming from environments that aren't ideal for what we might expect.
So their difference in their ability to read,
For
would
instance.
which we might at one level attribute to, perhaps this child has something that we should diagnose when
Exactly.
it's environmental,
That's
not
right.
super.
And that's a significant issue across Massachusetts. And there's this great report in 2015 called the Hare Report that details how Massachusetts were the second highest identifier of special education students in the country. Rhode Island is higher than us. And what they're noticing is that disproportionately, we are identifying students who are coming from backgrounds that are providing some sort of deficit, right? Not that these students have a diagnosable disability, and that's really different. And what's really troubling about the Massachusetts data is that those intersections are entirely around race and class lines. So we are disproportionately identifying children of color, children from poverty for special education, when in reality, their backgrounds were such that they didn't get the 5 million words. They were speaking a different language and are quite fluent in that language, but maybe not in English. So we're trying to switch that deficit model and look at those as actually something that the child can bring to a classroom community, rather than something that takes away from their learning and needs to be diagnosed.
And Julianne, you might just take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the research on inclusive practices.
Sure, yeah. So when you look at outcomes for those students, outcomes for students, and these are largely based on achievement outcomes for students that are in full inclusion, which is 80% of their general education, 80% of their educational time is spent in general education classrooms. Their outcomes are much higher than students who are pulled out for specialized services outside of the general education classroom. So when children are exposed to grade level material, grade level content, and differentiated instruction in the general education classroom, they do much better in life. They have much higher outcomes than the children who are pulled out for those specialized services. So it's a shift. It's definitely a shift of how we're thinking about students. But the real key here is we've been identifying some students as special education and pulling them out for services when they don't actually have a disability. They have need for an intervention, and that's a different piece. So that's sort of a realization and a shift that is not new by any stretch of the imagination, but is certainly gaining some ground in public education, which is great to see. And Easthampton is really at the forefront of it, which is really exciting. You guys should be very proud. And I think, and this shows it, right? This data these data are the ones that show that that's what's happening. That said, we can't ever stop improving how we provide resources for teachers in dealing with this increasing need. Just because they're doing well right now doesn't mean we get to, step back and say, nice job, you did it, because the need's increasing. We're seeing, this 8.5% increase just in this past year. So we need to be doing some more to provide support for those teachers, which now leads me to my training, unless there are any other questions, which I'm totally happy. I love talking about this stuff, guys. Yeah, call me up anytime. Okay, I will move on.
And I just will preface this, Julianne.
Yes.
Julianne came to me and asked me if she could have permission to go to this training, which I said, well, of course you can go to this training. But she had a very unique opportunity also through the collaborative, and you might want to...
Yes, I can introduce that piece. Yeah. So that's true. So last year on this day, I had not yet started working for Easthampton Public Schools, and had planned to be a part of this training for the collaborative, to work as a consultant for them to provide this training to districts around the Commonwealth. And then I got this amazing job, and I had to say that I couldn't do it for them. But I knew it was happening again this summer, and I saw our data, and I thought, they won't even notice me in the back of the room if I just show up to this training. So I contacted the collaborative, and they very graciously allowed us how I could just show up and be part of it, and that was fine. So the training was actually meant for members of collaboratives around the Commonwealth. So the collaborative model, and you probably know this, but the collaborative model is all over the Commonwealth. There are collaboratives in every region. And so this was a gathering of collaborative consultants to receive this trainer. It's a training of trainers model, to receive this training over 4 days. So it's packed in over 4 days, and then you take that training and could honestly spend years providing professional development around the research and strategies that the training provided. So it was really, really lovely to be included in that training. The trainers for this particular project, which is sponsored by the Department of Ed. The trainers were Albert Moussaad, who's an English language learner specialist at the collaborative, Sharon Jones, who's a special education consultant at the collaborative, Laurel Pelletier, who's a special education consultant, but also tells her story. She's the mother. She started off being sort of anti-special education, general education inclusion, and then had a son who is autistic and decided that she really needed to get on board, and has become inspirational in the work for full inclusion. And then Darnell Williams, who is also just an amazing presenter, who does the professional development and curriculum development for the Department of Youth Services, which is the group that works with incarcerated youth in the Commonwealth.
And Julianne, can you mention the name of the program?
I'm going to right now, I promise. It's called LEAP. And originally it was started as the Low Income Education Access Project. But after their first go around, they realized that it wasn't just about low income. It was also about the intersections of race and culture and conflict among those intersections. So now it is called the Leading Educational Access Project. And really at the key of that is the access piece, is how are we making general education accessible to all learners? Because we know that general education is the place where all learners really get the most growth over their time in our public schools. So the Leading Educational Access Project. And now I'm going to hit present. There we go. Maybe. Okay, so the learning objectives for this training, so 4 days, I'm giving you the first, I think like 10 slides of the full 4 days of training. So just the overview. For each one of these things, we did hours of workshop. The key concepts related to poverty, brain and learning principles, executive functions, and memory systems. So we spent a lot of time on each one of those things. Understand the strategies and resources related to those general concepts, and then be able to apply those strategies to provide professional development for Massachusetts educators. So we're going to understand all of these things, understand how to apply them, and then actually be able to train people in these concepts. So that was the point of the 4 days. Right, and there it is, the Leading Educational Access Project. So LEAP is based on this commitment to promote educational access and equity, which means all students have access to education. So a lot of words on this slide, but what you need to know is low-income students, English learners, students of color, students with disabilities. These are people who have been historically not included in our classrooms, and that has to change. So this is the values of this project, is that we're getting these kids back in our classroom. They are going to be reflected in our curriculum, and we are going to make sure that they are succeeding as our general education students are as well, and we're not going to label them special education if that's not what is going on for them, right? If they don't have that disability and merely have something that we can actually intervene and help them grow from. All educators are culturally proficient and honor as well as leverage diversity. So that was a big piece. That was what Darnell Williams spent a lot of time talking to us about, how it takes very little, you're probably familiar with the term microaggressions. It takes a very small moment to exclude a kid from learning. And we have to be more and more aware of those small moments that we are doing unknowingly. Be aware of them, acknowledge them, apologize for them, and learn from that experience so that we can include those students and not be making those tiny little aggressions that really exclude students from the classroom. So cultural proficiency is an underlying theme of all of this work. And I think a big part of that is because we know that, that what you guys just approved, the initiative you just approved around immigration and customs, we know that for immigrant families, for families of color, they're more likely to be in poverty than white families. And so in the country, not necessarily in this geographic area, but in the country they certainly are. And that's an intersection we need to look more at. We need to be very careful about how we may be alienating a student from the curriculum based on culture and poverty. And those intersections are going to stack up until the child really can't learn in our school system. So that's what we're trying to disrupt. We also spent a lot of time on family and community engagement, that we need to make sure that families and community members are part of the school experience for students, because that's another way that we really alienate students from the classroom, is by saying, oh, I know that's what your parents said, but that's not what I'm teaching you. And that's a really dangerous line to walk, because it really sets up this dichotomy for a student in terms of value systems. If your home value system is very different from your school value system, and you're a 14-year-old, you're not developmentally ready to choose your own value system, and so you're set up with this conflict right from the start. So really engaging families in our classrooms and being able to have conversations with them about what's best for their students, that's what we need to be aiming for. And I know that that's something that this district and this city has actually done really well. The family engagement that I've seen in this past year has been so lovely, and it can be we can just build on it because there's already such a strong foundation. Yes, working collaboratively to eliminate explicit and implicit bias, dismantle racism, and promote social justice. So all of those same things over again. Like this is the underlying principle of making sure that teachers are prepared with the research and the understanding of how the brain works to meet these challenges that the kids are coming into their classrooms with head on, so that they can be as successful as their white middle class peers, which is who historically do better on tests. All right, key focus areas. This is a lot of the same stuff, so I'm just not going to go through it much. The one thing I do want to point out is high mobility students. So that became a real topic of conversation for us. And we see that certainly in Easthampton, kids moving in and out of the district, foster children, homeless children, for lots of reasons. Kids' educational experience is disrupted, and there are really good ways that we can make sure that that doesn't impact them as terribly as it could. But we need to be aware of that. Decreasing inappropriate eligibility determinations for special education was a big piece of this, and also a big part of the HARE report. We also worked with Sharon Jones and the Collaborative last year to look at, are we identifying too many special education students? And we are on the high end of the Commonwealth, for sure. It's not terrible, but we certainly do need to be working more on identifying students. Like for instance, English language learners, that's a big group where if they don't pick up the English skills pretty quickly, they get very quickly identified as having a disability and then put into a special education setting where the emphasis isn't on the English language learning necessarily. And so to have those kids not in special education, but to have them with a certified English language learner teacher is the most important thing we need to do. And so we need to make sure we're not identifying those students for special education when really what they need is a specialized teacher, like an English learner teacher. And then last, part of inclusion, of course, is least restrictive environment, which is federal law. We are mandated that if a student can be in a less restricted environment, we put them there. So we don't just go to, oh, this kid needs extra help with math, let's pull him out of the classroom and give him extra help with math, because that's actually against the law. We have to make sure that students are in the best environment for their learning. So this, although we talked a lot about intersections of race and culture, definitely poverty was the overarching idea here, because we know a lot about how poverty and brain science how brain science can show us what poverty does to a child's brain. It's generally defined as lack of access to adequate resources. But we did, several times over the training, came back around to, we don't want this to be a deficit model. This is not about what children are coming to us without, it's that they're coming to us with difference. And that's a really important thing that we need to be sending as a message to our teachers, to our families, to our community, that we're not saying these kids are coming to us with less, we're saying that there's a difference, and we need to be prepared to receive that difference and honor that difference, and then be able to help the child succeed. We talked a lot about acute and chronic stress and what that does to the brain. And so I can't remember if I didn't include this slide, because it gets a little, we spent some time on the scientific piece of like the limbic system, and that availability for learning is directly related to pleasure and joy. And so in a classroom, or let me back up. So in a household where there's a lot of stress because you don't have enough money, you don't know where food is coming from, you're working, lots of hours, right? Regardless of how lovely the relationship is between the student and the caregiver, if the student is noticing those signs of acute and chronic stress in the caregiver, that can affect the student, and then that shuts down the brain's ability to receive pleasure and joy, meaning the child is no longer available for learning. So one piece of this is really working with our families and our community to make sure that we're taking care of each other, that when families are in need, as a community, we come together and we take care of those families. in our little microcosm of the school system, that's what needs to happen in our classrooms, right? Students need to experience pleasure and joy in learning in order for their brain literally to be able to receive the information. So we talked a lot about stress and how that affects our brains. Health and safety issues is also another one, especially around if you have parents who work and you have, sometimes we'll have older siblings taking care of younger siblings, there are certainly health and safety issues there, and we see many more, we see students coming from poverty, many more accidents, bumps and bruises. Like we see a lot of places where these students are not being, through no fault of the parents, not being adequately cared for, which means that our role in the school systems mean that we need to care for them that much more. Social and emotional challenges. There was an interesting piece around empathy and how the brain centers for empathy are really affected by poverty, and living in poverty can make you less empathetic to others' concerns, and that is a real challenge for students, especially in social situations where, you know, like if I'm worried about what I'm going to eat tonight, I can't really be worried that you didn't get the iPod case you wanted. And so that can create some social challenges, especially when you have such a wide range of students as we do in Easthampton. And then cognitive lags, that's back to the exposure and access to language-rich environments, parents who ask questions a lot. It's like something you're supposed to do as a parent, because parents, you're supposed to ask a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions to your kids. Because when you're not in a question-rich environment, then you're not asked to do the thinking. You're told a lot. And if you're told a lot, you continue to expect to be told. And you don't develop that habit of thinking and coming up with new information on your own. So these are things that we are seeing our kids experience. Yeah, this is just a nice little list of things that we are seeing in classrooms. I think if you ask any teacher, they would say, yes, these things are happening more and more. This is where we're seeing that higher need. And it's from poverty, it's from trauma, it's from race and culture conflict. Like it's across the board, especially in this increasingly diverse population in Easthampton. And yeah, any teacher you ask will say it's getting more and more of this is happening every single year that we welcome in our new students. We're seeing more of these behaviors. So it's something that we need to address. This is just to show the increases I was talking about later. So the Pioneer Valley, this is from 2014, and this is the difference between 2010 and 2014. There was a 11.27 increase in poverty in the Pioneer Valley as a region, and this is the state's data. So we've just seen that 8.5% increase in this last year, but even prior to that, there was an 11.27% increase in the Pioneer Valley between 2010 and 2014. Mm-hmm. So it's not just us, it's certainly across the Commonwealth, across the region. And so we have really good resources like the Department of Ed supporting this work for teaching strategies for students in poverty. So Eric Jensen wrote a couple of great books that if you're interested more in this topic of how poverty affects the brain and poverty affects a child's educational experience, Teaching with Poverty in Mind and Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind are both excellent books by Eric Jensen. Lots of brain science, lots of research, and not long. They're good reads. If that's what you read on the beach, which I do. It's nice. But the reason things stay the same, this is also from Jensen, is because we've been the same. And so we have to make a change if we expect there to be a change made. One thing that someone said in the training was, we've gotten to a point where the outliers are our normal students. We no longer have an idea of what a student should look like because the places where kids are coming from are so much more diverse that the majority of our kids are coming from outlier experiences, not from a norm, a social normed experience. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind when a teacher is preparing for a school year and thinking, got these 25 kids in my classroom, I'm no longer going to have that really nice even bell curve, right? We ditched that a while back. What we're going to see is kids really needing very separate entries into the learning. And we can do that. There are really good ways that we can do that. And that's, so then in the training, we got into, so what are those practices? So what do you do? Like, this all sounds like really terrible news. What do you do next? And the truth is, there's a lot we can do, from student-centered learning, giving students more choice and voice in the classroom, personalized learning, integrating technology. There's so much we can do to give students entry points into our general education curriculum, and we can do it. It's okay. Like, we are absolutely poised to be able to get this work done with your support, obviously. So things like, for instance, fostering a sense of belonging. For a lot of students, their experience of school is actually that it's very safe because they may not have a lot of stability at home, right? So these are examples of ways that strategies we can use. Homerooms. One of the things we'll be doing at the high school is increasing our advisory time. So there's more of a connection between students and teachers. It's not stuff where you have to blow up the whole model and start from scratch. We actually have a lot of things in place. We just can build on them, build on the good practices that we've already seen working. Higher order questioning is a big one, and the high school has already really been working on that in terms of their work on complex tasks. Problem-based learning, so great. Socratic seminars, I don't know if you've ever sat in on a Socratic seminar, but they're fascinating. And so it's all about the students. We've gotten rid of the stand and deliver instructional method, right? A teacher standing at the front of the room is not effective for the students that we're seeing in our classrooms. So we get to see them talk instead and them take control of and ownership of their learning. Multisensory instruction. So we've talked a lot about, over the past, we've talked about different, whether you're a kinesthetic learner, or you're an oral learner, or you're a verbal learner, or you're a artistic, all of these different kinds of learning. So if we know that kids learn best in all those different ways, then we need to provide multisensory activities for them to be involved in so that they can access the content in whichever way is best for them. So we get to lots of creative lesson planning. Cooperative learning, peer tutoring, mentoring, developing the relationships between students. So it's not just the teacher and then those are the students, but that the students are teaching each other is a really important piece of this work as well. There's so much. Building on prior knowledge. So one thing we know about students in poverty is that their prior knowledge is often lower than a student who's coming from a middle class background. And so being able to really look at, what are these students coming in from? Again, not looking at what they're not coming in with, but what are they coming in with that we can access? It may not be typical prior knowledge, but it's still important and we can still use it. And one example of that actually was around the English language learners. Having students who are coming in with another language is such a benefit to the whole class. And yet, I think historically, those students have been asked not to speak that native language in the classroom, not to access the learning that's been done through that native language. Everything is done in English, right? And our SEI, Sheltered English Instruction model, tells us we don't have to do that. We can access students' prior knowledge in their native language if that benefits their learning. So there's a lot of permission being given to be more creative and more open to what children are bringing into the classroom. I'm almost done, I promise. These are more just great strategies. And these are all things that I'm going to work with teachers on developing in their own practice so they feel more prepared to face the increasing need that we're seeing in the district. Personalized learning is a kind of a buzzword right now. I don't know if you guys have done any reading on that, but it's really about making sure that kids have what they need to develop their passions. We're seeking passionate learners. We're not seeking generalists across the board. I love, AP's honors courses for all. I was like, well, we already do that. Feeling pretty good about that one. And this is, again, all stuff that is already at the beginning of development in this district, and we get to keep going because we know it's working, and we know we just need to give our teachers more and more tools and resources to be able to do this work.
Oh wait, I have a question.
Oh yeah,
So can you go back just one?
yeah, that one.
What would place-based learning be? Would that be like field trips, things like that?
It's actually like what do they call it at the high school? Work-based. They call it work-based learning. It's like internships and apprenticeship learning. Yeah. Yep. So you get to like go to an actual kitchen in a restaurant and learn there, right? That's place-based learning. Thank you for asking that. Yep, kinesthetic, we've known for a while that we really do need to be approaching students with a kinesthetic eye because their bodies are actually growing, and to sit in a chair for an extended period of time while your bones are actually expanding is kind of a painful experience. And so children who move around and fidget, it's their bodies actually growing. It's not that they're being rude or disrespectful. And so we can develop a strategy for that. Let's get them up and move around, have it be part of the learning. We talked about walk to learn being a strategy where you do like your turn and talk with your partner, but walk around the room while you do it. It's more engaging, more lively, your brain lights up, all sorts of good things happen. And so this is more of this like service learning, community-based internships, making sure that by the time students are finishing high school, we have developed an excitement in each of them about something they love to do. That was, we hear that a lot from students who are coming from places of privilege and access, and not a lot from students who are coming from poverty, that they're really excited for some passionate thing that they're going to do next in their lives. We need to increase that because they have passions, and we need to give them more opportunities to develop them. Cute kids. Sorry, I couldn't handle not doing that one. So that was kind of our overview. That was like the half-hour overview at the beginning of the 4 days, and then we just went really deep into every single one of those things together for 4 days. And it was amazing, and I have resources and books and hundreds of PowerPoint slides and ideas for modeling the teaching strategies with teachers that I want them to use with their students. And I think most importantly, this is what teachers want to spend their time on right now. They want to be developing these resources and strategies to meet the needs that are coming into their classrooms. Nothing has changed with how much we love these children, but we need to come at them in a little different way in order to make sure that we're meeting the needs that they are facing in their lives.
And having Julianne get this training is such an asset to the district because, we're looking forward to having her bring all of these strategies into our curriculum and our instruction and to help support teachers, which she's so good at. Thank you for that.
So excited about it. Yeah. Do you guys have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, like, if there's a teacher in the district now who has a concern about either a specific situation or about kind of implementing some of these practices in general, like, what can they do kind of when they're in the thick of it? Like, if they're in, not kind of now in the summertime when people have some time, but like when they have a whole class to manage, they have to deal with all this other stuff, and then there's this one situation they're worried about, or there's a couple situations. Who do they go to? Like, how do they access those resources?
Well, so we've been working a lot with the principals to make sure that our principals are feel supported and have the tools in their tool belt to be instructional leaders for their staff, right? Okay. So that's kind of the big answer is our principals already know how to do this. They have teaching backgrounds. They we did this great lesson study last year around foundations of inclusive practice, and so all of the principals went through a 15 PDP course on how to be instructional leaders in this work. We also, like at the elementary level, we have a literacy instructional coach who goes in and does one-on-one coaching with teachers. I did that last year at the middle school because I was sort of stationed there to work with them, which was awesome. White Brook Middle School teachers are so much fun. They're great to work with. And the high school has actually been doing a lot of this work through their inquiry PD cycle. So there are teacher leaders and there are admin leaders, all who are really prepared for this. And then there are processes. If there's a real issue, there are behavior support teams in each of the buildings. building support teams is what they're called, not behavior support teams. We're eradicating the word behavior because it's not about behavior, it's about lagging skills. So we've building support teams, so there's a sort of a chain of command that teachers go through. And another piece of my job is that I run mentorship and induction program for the district. And so that's part of that entrance into the district is, here are all the ways you get to ask for help.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And isn't it true that there's some evidence to support the idea that many of the practices that we start out as thinking as being targeted for students for inclusion purposes also benefit students who were
Oh my gosh,
not the intended target group?
Yes.
So there's not so much a trade-off as a potential for some marginal gains there as well, right?
Yeah.
There's evidence to support that too? Okay.
There's so much evidence to support that, and that was actually a big piece of the Hare report as well, was, by the way, the general education kids who are also in these classrooms are also improving at greater gains than they were in the traditional model.
I think that's the hard part, both for some families and certainly for me, just personally as an educator, is to untrain your thought process that adopting these practices will take time away from practices that are better suited to students who you don't think of as the target audience. That the inclusion process doesn't mean that when you're using one process, one part of the room is benefiting at the expense of the other, or vice versa. That if you, and not wholesale, but that in many cases there are educational benefits to the whole classroom from adopting those practices.
Yeah, and where we hear that most often, the research that we see most often from that is from employment. That industries and employers around the country have said, you know, that those content standards that you've been teaching are all well and good, but there are also these soft skills of collaborating with people who have differences from you that are actually really important to being successful in the workplace that we're not being explicitly taught in that traditional model. So that's a place we really get that feedback is, and from colleges as well. Kids are more prepared if they've spent time not being in a classroom where everyone looks and thinks and learns just like them, right? So yes, lots of evidence for that.
Thank you.
So you've gone to this training, and I'm just trying to envision what it's going to look like for teachers. Is it an initial training the first few days of school? Is there ongoing training? Are there going to be days during staff meetings where time is dedicated? I'm just trying to understand how much of an investment, and vision is there for this.
So I have a plan for, so the modules, the way that they presented the training of trainer modules, they can be broken up into small chunks, which I think is the best way to take in the information. 4 days, just all the time, was a lot. It was awesome, but it's a lot. And I think any teacher would really appreciate the luxury of having just 4 days to spend on learning these new strategies. And so I feel very blessed that I was able to do that. But my plan is to chunk it into much smaller pieces, and exactly what you're saying, deliver it on PD days, in faculty meetings, across the board. So one of the other things that I think I shared with you is the PD schedule for the first 3 days. And so already in here, I'll be doing the introduction to this work with our elementary school on day 1 during their building-based PD, and with our middle school.
So that's you.
Yeah, our middle school on day 3, and then because the middle and high school are also doing that Anti-Defamation League training on that second day, I'm going to do my intro to the work with the high school at their first faculty meeting. So we've got places for me across the year where I'll be going into each of the schools to deliver small chunks, depending on really what the teachers need. So I'll be doing a little bit of needs assessment to figure out which chunks are most appropriate for which schools at given times of the year.
And just one, Nancy, I apologize if I missed it, but do we have the PowerPoint that we just saw?
We do. I do.
So, okay, could you send that?
I would love to.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, that'd be great.
I was hunting in my packet and everything, and then finally realized.
We decided that it was.
That's good. That's great.
It was enough slides that we were like, well, unless they really want it, maybe we shouldn't weigh you down with it. But if you really want it, yes.
Peter wants it.
No problem.
Just
We'll send it out to all of you.
Yeah,
and
just
you can
curious about a couple of
keep it or
things.
delete
so.
it.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Did I miss anything, Nancy?
Not unless there are any other questions about the first 3 days.
Yeah, are there more questions on those?
Any-
The opening days?
I just wanted to highlight
Yeah.
what you said about learning occurs in like joy. What was that? What did you
It's
say?
about the limbic system and about how, so the limbic system is what lights up when you're joyful, and it makes the places for our working memory more accessible to learning, right? So it's about memory and the function of the brain. So if you are joyful about something, or unfortunately, if you are traumatized by something, you're more likely to remember it. So there are these two extremes, right? So we would like to go on the joyful end of learning to try to reverse the effects of any trauma that students have had in their lives. But just in general, yes, your limbic system is the one that lights up, your working memory gets activated, you take in information, and that's how we learn.
Well, it's interesting because we had this discussion, and this is, I think, doing the visioning for the new building and the strategic plan I mean, joy is part of that,
Yeah.
and that keeps coming up, and so I think I kept looking to you, Peter, but I was like, there it is, joy.
Yeah.
It's conducive to learning. I wonder if you're going to take it into your classroom this year.
I would love that. I can only imagine how much I would have learned if I had been in a joyful mode all the time. It's scary because I remember it being a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
The joy came at the end. So
Well,
I was
you
like,
can be
I get
joyful
it
and
now.
hardworking at the
Yeah,
same
that's when
time.
the joy came.
And that's why, and I think that's why joy is the term that was used, and not happiness, or right, because joy can look really different. Joy can be satisfaction of getting really hard work done, being challenged and being able to meet that challenge. Like joy is, it's a really powerful emotion.
Yeah.
And doesn't always look like, oh, we're just happy and butterflies
Right.
and sunshine. Like that, it doesn't have to look like that.
And it's also important too if you have, certain families or children in who have had trauma or have a different background. For them, they're really in oftentimes scarcity. So like they're worried about survival.
Yeah.
And so when you have a background of people who have more privileged, or there is that they're coming in already, for the most part joyful.
Yeah.
So they're already prepped and ready to learn.
They don't have the acute and chronic stress that we see.
And so I think it's important, and I loved how you said there's not a problem here.
No.
It's just a different way of learning and ways to address really the underlying issue.
Yep.
And then once that occurs, then you can get people on students on the same
Availability for learning was really
Yeah.
the piece that we kept coming back to, was like, that's what you get to. You have to get to availability for learning.
Are there local community resources that we're partnering in to help support families who are living in poverty?
Yeah, Sarah Mochek is our Director of Special Education. She's also our homeless and foster liaison, and so we work with through that. We work with a lot of community supports around providing for those students. Also within the schools, like the work that we've done for providing breakfast and support for students in that way has been really important. I mean, if we're going to list a wish list, one thing that we might see on the list would be after-school busing opportunities. Sorry, Nancy.
I would love that too.
Yeah, I mean that's a piece that I see in our district that could make some real change.
Absolutely.
Is if we were able,
busing from
for
programs?
after-school programs, after-school tutoring. Such differences are seen in districts where children, especially ones that don't have homework support at home, or who don't have, we're like, oh, well, make sure you have a quiet space in your home to do your homework. Well, that's a piece of privilege,
Well, and that's actually
So,
that's actually feedback that we get from parents a lot too.
Yeah.
Is that would be very helpful for them. So.
Yeah, it really it's a huge expense, but
Yeah.
it absolutely is worth it to be able to keep kids longer in the school building instead of having to have them leave right at the end of the school day. Yeah.
But that's one of the quandaries that we have, is we have less and less dollars
Exactly.
coming in,
Yep.
and yet we all know that children would benefit from after-school programs,
Right.
from busing, from being able, to stay. there's so many supports that we know
I know,
to put
yeah.
in, and we just don't have,
Yeah.
schools don't have the
Resources,
money,
yeah.
and it just keeps
Yep.
shrinking, even in
Absolutely.
terms of human service funds.
Well, yeah, like all
So-
of the community supports are also, all of those budgets are being cut as well.
Oh,
So,
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, it's, do more with less.
Do more with less.
Well, and that's the wonderful thing about teachers in public schools
Yeah.
is that they manage
Mm-hmm.
to do so much more. The data shows,
Yep.
even though there's so much less. Teaching is really an avocation that is a joyful experience, hopefully, and a passionate experience, and so. That's why you're able to do that. Eventually, there is a breaking point, though.
There is, yeah.
Well, which is why I think it is important to make sure that teachers do have access to other team members who can help them
Correct.
implement some of
Yeah.
these strategies, because they already have so much on their plates just to manage on their own. To kind of add another, another set of evidence-based interventions that they can now go out and use. I think I just wanted to make sure that they were getting that support in their building, and it sounds like that's definitely a priority. So
It's definitely a priority. In fact, it's one of the things that's been dominating our conversations in our in doing the strategic planning has been we need to be supporting our professionals in this district. Professionals, not professionals, our staff members, are the people who come here to
Educators.
work, our
Yeah.
educators. That we really need to tighten up our systems for support for them.
And that was kind of where I was going with my concern is that, so many, we've got so much on our plates, so many times you get this one training.
right.
And then you have very little time throughout the school year to work collaboratively with other teachers or with other mentors to put that into practice. I mean, you can't just get trained once
Yeah.
and suddenly go out. Some people can. but-
Julianne has been very good at providing that ongoing support through professional learning communities, through our data teams. We
Yeah.
try to find as many different ways that we can for our teachers to be able to collaborate, our staff to be able to collaborate.
Yeah, and the principals do such a great job with scheduling too, and making sure that people have common planning time, especially between special education and general education teachers. The middle school has really prioritized that in their schedule, which is amazing. I mean, yes, those things will make a difference as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Julianne.
Thank you so much.
Very great presentation.
Come back
And-
anytime.
And thank you for your, your passion for this and other things.
I can't help myself. I mean, that's
Well, and I think, when you're training staff and
Right.
other like administrators or teachers, that's a very easy way for them to then.
Yeah. And I see that in our principals too. They get so excited and passionate about things, and it's an incredible team to work with because they're like, oh yeah, we are on board. We're going to do this, and it's so nice to work with people who are all so committed and joyful and totally joyful.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're not necessarily happy.
No, she clarified that. It's
I know.
joy. It's not happiness.
We're not in the happiness
Joyfully
business.
rigorous.
That's right. And I just wanted to mention that the anti-defamation training that we're doing on Wednesday, the 30th of August, for the middle school and high school teachers, Phil Fogelman, who's actually the facilitator for all that, will be here on August 24th, and he'll probably be talking a little bit more about that at that time and available to answer questions about that program. We're excited about it.
Very good. Do you have any other updates?
No, that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to our matters for action. We have payroll.
Right, so I move to approve the school payroll dated 20th of July, 2017, in the amount of $329,583.99.
Second.
There's a motion, it's been seconded to approve the school payroll dated July 20th, 2017 in the amount of $329,583.
One note, in the document here, the text and the numbers don't agree.
Oh.
So I suggest that we go with the 99 cents, because if we're better to be over by 99 cents than under.
Yes. Okay.
So we're approving this.
Did you say that originally? That
Yes.
way? Okay.
I I think so, because
We
I was,
added the 99 cents.
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just add the 99 there.
All right.
Okay.
So the motion was to approve, and it's been seconded, to approve the school payroll dated July 20th, 2017, in the amount of $329,583.99. All those in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for
So,
catching that.
yep, and so then we have no payroll for the 27th of July, but I do move to approve the accounts payable authorization for payment dated 27 July 2017 in the amount of $26,498.93.
Second.
There's a motion, it's been seconded to approve the accounts payable authorization for payment dated July 27th, 2017, in the amount of $26,498.93. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Right, and then I move to approve the payroll dated August 3rd, 2017, in the amount of $315,380.36.
Second?
There's a motion, it's been seconded to approve the school payroll dated August 3rd, 2017, in the amount of $315,380.36. All those in favor? Motion passes.
And then I move to approve the accounts payable authorization for payment dated August 3rd, 2017, in the amount of $134,958.33.
Second?
There's a motion, it's been seconded to approve the accounts payable authorization for payment dated August 3rd, 2017, in the amount of $134,958.33. All those in favor? Motion passes.
And then
Thank you.
the minutes are next, right?
Correct.
So I move that we approve the minutes of the July 13th, 2017 regular meeting.
Second?
So motion, it's been seconded to approve the minutes for the July 13th, 2017 regular meeting. All those in favor? Motion passes.
And then I move to approve but not yet release the executive session minutes of the July 20th, 2017 meeting. The chairperson will review and release the executive session minutes at an upcoming meeting once the matters are resolved. This is once all contracts have been signed, which is in process but has not yet been done.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion, it's been seconded to approve the, was it the
Oh,
dates
sorry.
of the,
Yeah,
that's
sorry.
okay, executive session meeting on July 20th. And they will be reviewed and released at an upcoming meeting. All those in favor? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Right, and then we have a budget transfer motion. Oops, sorry. I'll do it this way with paper. I don't know why my electronic version comes up in a delay. But, hold please, here we go. So, due to an increased cost of internet service via new fiber, the amounts are, okay, the accounts are listed here for the listening audience. I don't think we need to read all of those.
I don't think so.
But transfers in the amount of $2,500, $4,800, and $6,900. This is requested by the Director of Technology for the district, Ashley Barstow. So I move that we approve the transfer request.
Second?
There's a motion, it's been seconded to approve the budget transfer request
In these amounts.
on these amounts of $2,500, $4,800, $6,900 at the request of Ashley Barstow for meeting the increased cost of internet service via new fiber. All those in favor? Motion passes.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
The motion to adjourn has been seconded. All those in favor? Meeting is adjourned.
So I have one
Thank you very
technical
much.
question about the accounts payable. I don't have copies to sign, as I traditionally do here. There are copies here.